Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to get into something really interesting that's happening in healthcare education.
Yes, we're looking at how digital technology is changing the way physical examination skills are taught.
Exactly. And our main source here is a research paper. It's from Advances in Health Sciences Education. The title is Digital Technology in Physical Examination Teaching: Clinical Educators' Perspectives and Current Practices.
Right. And this study, it involved talking in depth with 18 clinical educators. These were folks from medicine, physio, midwifery, nursing, all based in Australia.
So a good cross-section. Our mission, really, for you listening, is to understand how these digital tools are actually being used right now, how they're perceived by the educators teaching the next generation of healthcare professionals.
And maybe uncover some surprising things about how technology is, well, sometimes embraced, but sometimes almost invisible when it comes to teaching these really fundamental skills.
Okay, let's dive in. What jumped out at you first from the research?
Well, the first thing that really hits you is just how divided the opinions are. The researchers talk about these polarized perspectives.
Polarized, okay.
Also,
On one side, you've got this view that digital tech is almost like an anti-human other.
yeah.
There's this real concern it could make healthcare less personal.
Yeah. Depersonalizing it, undermining that human connection, the empathy, the trust that's just so critical in a physical exam.
Exactly. And, worries that it's kind of oppositional to touch itself being seen as this vital way of gathering information.
Right. That traditional bedside examination, it's seen as so important, isn't it? And the fear is tech might chip away at the time needed for that real human interaction.
Precisely. And then there's apprehension about simulation technologies. People worry they might end up replacing valuable time spent in actual clinical placements.
And maybe not reliably teaching those essential, subtle skills you get from real patients. That's the concern. Plus, this fear of becoming over-reliant on the machines, that students might lose the understanding of the underlying principles, what they should actually be looking for or feeling during a manual exam.
You hear that phrase, right? Nothing can replace real patient interactions. It really sums up that side of things.
It does. And even a concern that simulation, which everyone agrees can be useful, might just be used as a replacement for real practice, maybe to save time or resources.
So it goes beyond just the tools themselves, doesn't it? It taps into deeper ideas about what good care looks like.
I think so. That anti-human view seems really rooted in valuing that direct, unmediated human interaction as the absolute core of good care and diagnosis.
Like technology creates a barrier.
Potentially, yeah. Hindering those interpersonal skills, the ability to read subtle cues you only get face-to-face. But interestingly, the study also shows a lot of enthusiasm on the other side.
Okay, so not everyone's worried. There's excitement too.
Definitely. You have educators who see digital tech as this really exciting, flexible, accessible new frontier in how we teach healthcare.
What kind of things are they excited about?
Things like high-fidelity simulation, these super realistic scenarios. Also, AI, artificial intelligence, and VR, virtual reality, to really immerse students in situations safely.
Yeah, I can see the appeal there. Less risk, more repetition.
And they're looking ahead, too. The paper mentions things like haptic gloves.
Haptic gloves, what are those?
Gloves that give you tactile feedback. So imagine being able to actually feel resistance during a simulated exam, like feeling contractions on a model of a pregnant abdomen.
Wow, okay. That could really change simulation, make it much more about the feel of things.
That's the idea. And generally, simulation offers more chances to practice, to break down complex exams, really get the anatomy down.
Plus the instant feedback aspect, right? Making decisions in the simulation and seeing the results without any patient risk. That's huge.
It is. But what's interesting is that even the enthusiasts often still connect these technologies back to that ideal of the real patient encounter. The aim isn't usually to replace it entirely.
Or more like enhance it or prepare students better for it.
Exactly. It's about finding the right role for the technology.
Okay, so we have these two camps, these different perspectives.
Yeah.
But how are these technologies actually being used in teaching right now, according to the study?
Well, the researchers broke it down into three main ways. The first they called situated and real-time.
Situated in real time.
Yeah.
Meaning used right there with the patient.
Yes. Think about things like mobile chest X-ray machines, fast scans in trauma, bedside ultrasound, ECG machines, blood gas machines.
Okay, tools used for immediate diagnosis at the point of care.
Right. And what's fascinating is the educators often didn't even really think of these as digital technology in the teaching context. It was just standard practice, seamlessly integrated.
Almost invisible because it's so routine. Interesting. What was the second category?
That was real-time and anywhere. This basically covers remote access and video conferencing for teaching.
Ah, telehealth, which obviously became huge recently.
Exactly. It allowed supervision of exams remotely, which was crucial for students who couldn't be on site, maybe in rural areas or during lockdowns.
And it extends communication possibilities, connecting educators, learners, and patients differently.
It does, but the educators were quite clear. They see telehealth as an alternative, not a replacement for being there in person.
That makes sense. It requires different skills too, right? Building that rapport and empathy over video.
Definitely. The study mentions needing really refined communication skills, and it positions telemedicine as this spectrum from a phone call to video to face-to-face, each with trade-offs. You might lose the tactile element but gain other things, like avoiding exposure during a pandemic.
Okay, so situated, real time.
Mm-hmm.
Real time, anywhere. What's the third way tech is integrated?
The third is anywhere and anytime. This is all about those flexible digital learning resources.
Like using smartphones, tablets, online apps.
Precisely. Giving students access to materials whenever, wherever. Things like videos, audio clips, images used to help them learn examination techniques.
So preparatory materials on learning platforms, maybe. Things to look at before a practical class.
Yeah, exactly that. The paper gives an example of physio educators using videos of impairment tests so students come prepared for the hands-on session.
And using devices at the bedside, too, for quick reference.
Yes, that just-in-time knowledge. They mentioned the Geeky Medics app, for instance, for quickly looking up steps in a neurological exam right there.
And using digital platforms for things like reflection, like keeping electronic logbooks.
That too. So it seems digital tech is woven into this much more deeply than maybe even the educators themselves always realize.
Which brings us to that point about the invisibility of these technologies. That sounds really intriguing.
It really was a key finding. There was often this gap, this disparity between how educators talked about using technology and what they actually did.
How so? Give me an example.
Well, someone might initially say, oh no, I don't use technology much at the bedside. But then later in the conversation, they'd mention routinely using, say, portable chest x-rays or ECGs to correlate with their physical findings.
Ah, so because it's so routine, so embedded, it doesn't even register as technology anymore, like the furniture.
Pretty much. The study suggests this happens with things that are just there in the environment, online learning systems, patient monitors, those computers on wheels you see everywhere.
And the paper also suggested technology might become invisible if it's seen as maybe conflicting with the high value placed on touch.
Yes, that was a fascinating point. There was an example of an educator who strongly denied using digital tech, but then enthusiastically described using an electronic stethoscope with a speaker.
Why? So the whole group of students could hear the heart murmur.
Exactly. So because that tech enhanced the core skill of listening, of auscultation, it wasn't really perceived or labeled as technology in the same potentially negative way. It was just a better stethoscope.
So visibility increases when the tech does something really specific or maybe extends practice in a novel way, like the real-time ultrasound for pelvic floor exams they mentioned.
Right, or telemedicine. But visibility also increased, interestingly, when the tech was seen as potentially problematic.
How do you mean?
Like the concern that maybe some nurses were relying too much on the numbers on the bedside monitor instead of their own clinical reasoning and direct assessment. Then the technology becomes very visible, but as a potential issue.
Okay, this is really complex. So pulling all this together, what are the main takeaways here? What does this tell us about where things stand?
Well, I think first off, it shows that touch and technology, they aren't this simple either binary. They're in this constant dynamic interplay.
And educators often hold on to this real as ideal view. The authentic patient encounter is the gold standard.
But as the study shows, digital tech is already massively integrated, often in ways people don't even notice. It's extending senses, scaffolding learning.
So there's a potential gap between the rhetoric about technology and the reality of its integration.
Definitely. It suggests there's a real need for educators to maybe step back and critically look at their own assumptions and practices around these tools.
And maybe question that real is ideal idea a bit. Like, could teaching away from the patient sometimes, using tech as a scaffold, actually be beneficial?
That's a key implication. Perhaps technology has a really valuable role in building foundational skills before the high-stakes patient encounter.
So for faculty development, maybe focus on the language used around tech. Explore how and when to use it best.
Exactly. Emphasize how tech can scaffold those real experiences, and even make explicit the ways tech can facilitate tactile learning, like with haptics or even just repeated simulation practice.
Okay, so let's recap quickly. Digital technology is, well, it's deeply embedded in teaching physical exams, often unseen. Educators have diverse views, some worried about dehumanization, others excited about the potential.
And that real patient encounter ideal is still central, that technology is interacting with it in complex ways, both supporting and challenging it.
Which leads us to a final thought for you, our listener, to mull over.
Think about how subtly technology shapes even our most basic human interactions already. As these digital tools get even more integrated into healthcare, how might our fundamental understanding of something like touch actually evolve?
Yeah, and what are the consequences of that for practitioners and for patients down the line? What other things we think of as traditional might already be more technological than we realize?